Everyone, so thank you for coming. Claudia asked me to introduce myself. I'm Heather Payton, and I have about 20 years of clinical research experience. I spent 11 years in a large pharmaceutical company, did about 3 years of consulting, helping small to mid-sized biotechs implement their early clinical stage programs, and joined Prometrica, a full-service CRO, about a year ago in August. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is centralized real-time data review and utilization of targeted SDV in the era of flexible monitoring. So I wanted to go over a little bit about what's required. It really requires local regulatory knowledge, really strong relationships with your investigative sites and medical experts, and a highly experienced worldwide cross-functional team. World-class data science, technology, having the full gamut is what's required to really do that centralized review that you need. This is an overview of my presentation. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the change in mindset, and that leads right into the rationale for the different approaches to monitoring. We'll go into a little bit about prerequisites and tools. I'll give a case study, which hopefully demonstrates the value proposition in rare disease, and talk about additional considerations. So first, the change in mindset. First, I want to say that the information regarding the flexible monitoring model really is from publicly available information. You'll see a lot of Transcelerate tools within my presentation. I'm not a member of Transcelerate, but have taken their publicly available tools as industry standards, and will use them for all future studies to comply with ICH and GCP. So the main point with this slide is to really talk about how this isn't something that just happened in November of 2016 with R2. It really started back in '98, where the FDA stressed personalized contact with monitors and investigators in their guidance. In '96, ICH E6 provided flexibility in how trials are monitored. And it even provided the ability to provide centralized only review in exceptional circumstances. By '98, the FDA was suggesting more flexibility in what was considered acceptable in monitoring strategies. In 2007, the FDA started in their public forums talking about quality by design. In 2009, CTTI was formed, which really, its mission was to identify processes to increase quality and efficiency in trials. And then what happened in 2009 and 10 is we were seeing a lot more warning letters with regards to inadequate monitoring. So it was things like investigators failing to meet GCP, failure for monitors to find failure in protocol compliance, and failure for sponsors to promptly take action to correct deficiencies through monitoring when they were identified. So by 2011, 2 draft documents, the FDA and EMA, indicating that we were being encouraged to modify our own practices to address these concerns. And in 2013, the FDA and EMA finalized their guidances. So, some of the documents we mentioned before on the timelines were really the framework of the concepts that multiple groups have used to drive industry to change. It really is a regulatory drive to adopt these practices according to risks and move away from the idea that one size fits all. So the idea that you can go in and do 100% source doc verification at every single site and that's all you need to do is really not the model. CTTI stressed that there's not one simple approach for a clinical trial. It really should be tailored to the individual trial and combine several different monitoring methodologies. The FDA guidance was intended to support sponsors in developing their risk-based strategies and plans, and the plans really should be specific to human protection and data integrity. It encouraged the combination of monitoring activities and promoted greater reliance on centralized monitoring where appropriate. The EMA paper focused on risk-based quality management through use of risk indicators. And the key really is to start really early in the project by adapting protocols, by identifying key processes that may need to be, have additional oversight or adjudication. And it really is to build on your experience over time and implement those things at a trial level. Centralized is a not-for-profit collaboration of about 1,000 individuals in 26 countries. And their mission is to design things that will improve efficiency, effectiveness, and high-quality clinical research. So, R2, this really is what we quote now as allowing our flexibility in monitoring approaches and increased focus on critical data and processes, and implement systems to manage the quality. It really is all about risk identification, evaluation, communication, review, and risk reporting. It utilizes centralized monitoring to complement the on-site monitoring. So this whole methodology really is shifting from having CRAs go to sites and sit and check boxes and just exclusively and excessively do source doc verification to really a more comprehensive risk-based monitoring approach. And it starts at the beginning of the project, identifying scientifically and identify operational risks and early identification of issues and potentially even preventing issues from happening at the beginning. And really it is the advances in technology that allow for this more holistic approach. The philosophy shifts, which allows employment of centralized monitoring and off-site monitoring to really look at the important study endpoints. And then what the CRAs do when they go on site is to verify the stuff that we cannot verify centrally. So it's to look at PI oversight, it's to look at training records, it's to look at drug accountability. It's the things that we can't look at centrally. And again, it's really quality by design, so focusing on what matters early in developing and planning your trial. It's identify the risks and mitigate as much as possible. So conduct early and ongoing risk assessments. Centralized has a tool called RACT, which helps you do this identification. It employs the best mechanisms to monitor the remaining data. So what are those critical variables and how are you going to focus on the processes and data to make sure that you have a good quality study? It involves using those risk indicators, thresholds, and action plans and putting those in your monitoring plans and target interventions based on what you're seeing. And it's not done at the beginning of the study and the finalization of those plans. It really is adjusting those activities based on what you're seeing and what the risks are. Okay, it really is about one size not fitting all. So not all studies are the same. And the traditional 100% source doc verification approach has been shown in study after study to not really impact the overall data quality. You can have programmatically assisted monitoring centrally. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's more effective. And it frees up the CRA to do the stuff on site. It's higher value that you can't do centrally. This is just one example. There are a lot of studies. This is the quoted from the Centralized paper. So from this, you see that about 97% of data is never corrected after it's entered. And of the 3% that is corrected, those are corrected through auto query and other corrections, so through centralized monitoring, listing review, data review. So the 1% of data that's left is what is corrected by that manual check. All that time that the CRAs have been spending on sites doing those manual checks, it only accounts for 1% of the overall data. So the prerequisites, the organization really needs to be willing to change. So it's this whole mindset of, I just don't feel comfortable not having the CRA sit there and check 100% of the data. It really is up to all of us to make that shift so that, and trust in the centralized review. Successful TSDV really relies on that proper risk identification. The RAC tool is a publicly available tool that you can utilize for that. Medidata does have edge risk management if you're looking for not a spreadsheet solution. You really have to understand what data and processes are important. And I'll go through a few examples that will maybe highlight some of that. You have to build your own monitoring strategy to ensure quality and data integrity. Of course, centralized monitoring is reliant upon timely data entry. That seems to make sense, but this is one of the areas where if your CRAs aren't sitting on site ensuring that every box is checked, they can pick up the phone and call and figure out why the sites aren't entering their data on time. They can provide that additional assistance if it's not understanding. This is one of the ways that we really can start to utilize the holistic monitoring approach. Of course, you need to have agreement on which monitoring strategies are best suited to ensure quality and data integrity. So that means that it's not just the trial lead making these decisions. It's the entire study team. So if you pull in stats and data management and you have your clinical team along with your medical experts and your sponsor, you really can as a team decide what your monitoring strategy should be to ensure that data quality. Centralized monitoring is relying, some of the tools, you have to have a way to assign and track what the CRAs are doing on site, and you have to have the ability to centralize that data monitoring, or monitor that data centrally. So that could be programmed edit checks, it could be listings and tables, or there are advanced statistical models in looking for things. I'm off a slide, aren't I? This is the one I just presented. So targeted SDV, it's a tool that allows for an advanced method to identify and track which variables are source doc verified. You do it through blocks and tiers, and you can have, it can be adaptable, so that the first subject at each site has 100 or 75% source doc verification, for example, and then each subsequent subject is 25%, for example. You can have individual changes at the study level, regional level, so if you have a regional influence, you can implement what you're going to SDV in those regions. You can do it at an individual site level if you anticipate having issues or you see issues, and you can do it at an individual subject level. One of the things I want to stress, though, is that the normal workflow for CRAs, what they're used to doing day by day, is unchanged. It really is what happens behind the scenes that's changing. So we're basically just identifying what the CRAs need to SDV, not their normal workflow, and I'll show that. And CRAs are able to revert back. So if they find something in their source doc review, so if they're there reviewing medical records, it doesn't prohibit them from going in and verifying additional fields. It just changes what's required for that individual CRA to verify. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about a case study. So this is a real study, a real phase 2 open label, where the subjects are going to have 3 times a week dosing of a drug where it's a rare disease. They have a rare blood disorder. There are local and central labs. It's a safety study. And there's key secondary endpoints that are MRI derived, and the duration is 12 months. So if we look at what some of the potential critical data are and what the critical processes are, definitely it's the adverse event data, right? It's a safety study. So potentially we may want adverse events to be 100% source doc reviewed, and then only key variables source doc verified. The MRIs are a key secondary endpoint, so we're going to have those reviewed and adjudicated centrally. Subjects are having 3 times a week dosing. So back at the beginning of the study, when we were talking about quality by design, what do we want to define as 3 times a week? And so we decided that Monday, Wednesday, Friday dosing removes any interpretation of what 3 times a week means. And so implementing those changes back at protocol development is one of the ways, when you're sitting down and talking through it, is one of the ways to address it at the protocol level. Okay, so this is a case study in Medidata Rave. You can see that there's different tier assignments, and in this example, subjects 27 and 28 are assigned to different tiers. So these are 2 different adverse event forms, and so you can see that for 27 that this is not an adverse event that was identified as needing verification, but 28 it is. And so those little orange flags to the side let the CRA know that those pages are what need to be verified. And again, this can be changed during the conduct of the study. So if you're seeing something at a certain site, you can change it at the site level, regional level, country level, et cetera. And this is just another view. So you can see the difference between subjects 27 and 28. You can see there's only 3 forms required for 27, where there are multiple others for 28. Okay, so some considerations. So what does it really mean if a CRA saves an hour doing source doc verification? Because they're still doing source doc review. And again, I want to stress that reduced on-site monitoring is not monitoring. You still have to review and ensure the quality of every single data point. It's just where you're doing that monitoring from. You're not having the CRA sit on site and do that manual check. You're sitting centrally, and as a centralized monitor, you're reviewing listings or other outputs that are being developed for you so that you know which data to query. The data managers are still doing their outlier reports. They're still querying at that level. So it really is just that time savings for the CRA at the site, not doing those manual checks that result in 1% of the data being changed. And by doing that, you really do free them up to do additional protocol training, to do additional adverse event report training, to do all of the stuff, again, that you can't do centrally. So it's not diminishing the CRA's role. In my opinion, it really is raising it up to the next level, where they're not just box checkers. They really are people who are helping you ensure the stuff that the regulators want you to make sure is happening at the site level is happening. We talked about before that centralized monitoring relies heavily upon real-time access to the data to be most effective. If a site is waiting 6 months to put their data in, this model is not going to work. You have to have that assurance that sites are getting their data in. And all monitoring needs to be documented, including the centralized monitoring. So again, it's not alleviating the fact that you're reviewing all data. It's just shifting what the CRAs are doing on site. And I think I went through my slides really fast. So do you have any questions? Yes. Oh, I think she wants you to get a mic. Sorry.
Thank you. I've seen that metric before in terms of the value that SDV brings to the table in terms of it really only 1% of the data ever changing as a result of that task. How do you decide, or where do you see that value in terms of where to apply SDV then? If we see that it doesn't add a lot of value and data's not changing, where do you apply it and why?
So one example I can give of how I have applied it is regards to local labs. We have a study that does, all the safety labs are done locally, and the number of hours that our CRAs have to sit there and spend looking for that 1% of data, we can easily identify that centrally. So our monitoring strategy is targeted towards that. So we spend a lot more time looking at the medical records, looking for unreported adverse events, looking for, making sure it's a PK study, so making sure that the infrastructure is there to ensure that the PK samples are getting to the lab. So that's one example of how we made the cutoff. It's the local lab values that we can catch centrally. If there's something that's not within normal, we query it already. If they're missing a decimal point, for example, those simple data entry type errors, that's how we've drawn the line.
Thank you. Can I ask one follow-up question in terms of source data review? We talked about the importance of documenting the monitoring that's being done. In your experience, how have you gone about documenting source data review?
So it's, again, trial by trial level. So you have to decide at the trial level what it is that you want them to review. For me, it's always adverse events. I want them reviewing the medical records to ensure that those adverse events, and especially serious adverse events, are being reported. It's study by study what you have the CRAs going into the medical records looking for.
But how are you documenting that in terms that the review was conducted per the plan?
So it's just in the trip report.
Trip report.
We don't have necessarily a sophisticated way of that back information. It's in the trip report.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I 100% agree on the value of SDV versus SDR. And I would say if I ran the world, SDV would go away entirely. But clearly that's not happening anytime soon. But, just in the conversation about documentation, right, and the use of the TSDV, and full disclosure, we're implementing TSDV as well at Astellas, but I worry that we're perpetuating a problem with this because it's really easy to document SDV, and that's a lot of the reason why focus gets put on it, and it's really hard to document SDR, but clearly that's the more valuable activity.
Great.
So by spending a lot of time putting in a really cool technology that allows us to perpetuate that documentation of SDV, I worry that we're continuing to elevate the value of something that really isn't valuable. How do you get the CRAs to understand that the truly valuable activity is the SDR?
So from my experience, it really is having those conversations with your CRAs. And they at first, when you introduce the idea, I've had many say, you're just trying to get rid of my job. But when you have those you sit down and you talk to them and you say, no, look, I need you to really review the records. I need you to really look for what's missing, for what they're not understanding the protocol correctly. It comes back to training. And one-on-one, I've had a lot of success with CRAs wanting to provide that additional value rather than just sit there and box check. I have to fully admit, not all of them get there, but the ones that do, it's really, really valuable. So you have to really, it's a lot of time commitment up front to know which CRAs are going to be able to follow you in this evolution. There probably are some in reality that won't.
I guess this is my plea that if anybody can come up with a really cool technology solution for documenting SDR, that would be helpful.
There you go, metadata.
Hi. Did you find any challenges when you moved from
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excel to ERAC tool? Like when you said that you used ERAC tool to get the risk monitored
Yes.
data, right? So did you find any challenges how to how you transfer the data from the Excel, like before you get the source data, everything in the Excel format, and then you move to the ERAC. What are the challenges you find?
So I've only used the manual tool. So I definitely, so it's the rack tool, and they actually have a library of questions that you can pick from for your particular trial that you go through. And in answering those questions, you get the level of risk associated with that task, and then you have a space where you put in what you're going to do to mitigate that risk. And then you can expand the tool so that you can identify if you have identified them and what you've done about it at a patient level. As far as, say, the metadata rack tool, I can introduce Greg. Greg Vesser's a colleague of mine, and here at Medidata, and he's a solutions specialist. So can you talk to if people have taken the Excel document and turned it into the e-tool?
We do have a rack tool that's built into our strategic monitoring solution. And I'd invite you all to come down to the innovation station and take a look at that tool, how we've got it structured, how it's unified within our platform, and how that can be leveraged. As far as real world experience, I personally don't, but we've got some folks there that can speak to how that would work. Yeah. And I did want to comment, I think it was Jacqueline from Astellas. We do have within Ray VDC the ability to apply review requirements down to specific field level. So that would be something you could implement. It's not a part of TSDV, so you can't adjust the monitoring level or the review requirements, but you can apply it to individual data points. Gotcha. Okay.
Hi, I have one question for you as well. You talked about the ability to change the SDV, the tiers or the blocks based on certain criteria, if it's the region or even a site or a subject level. Do you implement that in the studies that you run? Or do you set the strategy up front and then it basically stays that way throughout the course of the trial?
So in my experience, it is best if you set it up front, but you can change it as you go on. But Greg, do you want to field that one too?
You have a strong monitoring plan in place and a design for your TSDV overall. However, during the conduct of your trial, you can adjust that, and it could be on a per subject basis by simple logic checks. So if a subject has an experience in SAE or perhaps they're a screen failure, you're moving them up or down to different tier levels. And then we also give you the ability to manually perform those changes as well.
And that's how I've done it, is at the site level, manually increase, and then go back to manually decrease. At a subject level at a site, I haven't done the
Questions?
Just looking at the title, you talked about the role of centralized monitoring and the importance of it. We talked about reduced SDV, fully agree there. When you do your targeted SDV, can you talk about how you implemented, did you use a CSA tool for centralized monitoring, or how did you look at the data as well?
So we did it just with listings and tables and had, so it really is a combination between a clinical review and a data management review. So we have not yet used the CSA tool. It's through manual review of listings and tables and those sorts of things.
So do you see this sort of moving into other areas within monitoring? So for example, protocol variances, is there any interest in reducing the amount of work that monitors have to do? I'm thinking mainly for like out of window deviations. It's a lot of time for our monitors to calculate and say this is 2 minutes out of window when we can do that programmatically. Do you see the industry moving in that direction?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So I think that's one of the benefits of working closely with your data management team and your and having that centralized review is because it is so much more efficient to build in those programs and look for those deviations. Another thing about this whole process is if you think about those windows as you're developing the protocol and do those 2 minutes, like is that really the window? That helps enormously. So as you're building your protocol, really talking through those things and building on experience. You know, I have a lot of experience with protocol amendments and widening those windows, so like build those in up front. But yes, definitely programmatically is the way to go.
Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about your strategy for identifying which variables are critical for 100% SDV and how you kind of leverage that with the different tiers?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really is, as I spoke about, it's sitting down with that cross-functional team. And so for us, the critical variables were safety, and they're specific safety variables. So there's certain chemistry tests that we're targeting. There's a potential for an increase in lactic acid. So we target those. So any changes in pH or changes in lactic acid, we go back and verify that the processing has occurred within the time window that it's needed to occur to make sure that the variables are actually valid. So it's that sort of approach. So as we sit down with a cross-functional team, we say, okay, all SAEs are definitely going to be 100% source stock verified. And then from a lab perspective, we're going to verify all pH and lactic acids. And then we're going to, for example, verify that that all the MRIs have been transferred. So like you pick out which variables that as a team that are going to be verified, and then the tool allows you to randomly look at the other variables to ensure that across the study you're doing some level of SDV.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, by show of hands, how many of your organizations have implemented some sort of a risk-based monitoring practice? Wow, that's great. Any other questions?
Do you have any suggestions on how to really alleviate maybe site burden? Because they have to work with the CRA while they're on site, and then they work with maybe some of our in-house CRAs while we do remote review, remote SDV. So we're asking a lot of them when we go on site, but then also submitting their source documentation so we can SDV. Any suggestions on how to kind of reduce or alleviate that workload for the sites?
My suggestion is back at the protocol level, only collect what you need.
Mm-hmm.
So many protocols just, they put every questionnaire in there and every scientific thing that would possibly be interested in looking at. So from a site perspective, this potentially can reduce the amount of time the CRA is on site. So potentially it can reduce that burden by only making them meet with the CRA one day instead of 3. But my suggestion is at the protocol level, really collect
Only what you need.
what you need. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I just wonder right now, do you have like a ratio of all the sponsors coming to you? What kind of ratio that they are interested in TSDV, and what's the ratio of actually implementing TSDV?
So I have to say that a lot of our sponsors are coming to us as experts, so it really is up to us to do this kind of presentation and teach them of why it's of value to them. But I have to say most are hesitant at first, just because they are so comfortable with that 100% SDV model that, from a percentage perspective, I would say most now going forward because of the regs, and when we describe it that way, that the regulators really do want us to move in this direction and have your monitors spend time making sure the PIs are, checking for GCP and those sorts of things. Most come along with us, but there's still those that are certain that 100% is the only way to go.
Are you able to utilize the other sponsors' experience and convince them to say, this is where everyone is moving towards right now?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Heather. Appreciate it.